All right. Good morning, everyone. This is Frank Latte. I'm here with the expert team. We have our experts here, our experts therapists, and today we are talking about dealing with childhood traumas. We sent out a blog last week on traumas and basically how childhood trauma can affect the relationship that you're in. And today we wanted to kind of follow up and to provide more interventions, more actionable steps that if you find yourself impacted by trauma, if you find yourself impacted by things in the past that is impacting your current relationship, what are some ways and what are some actionable things that you can do to make it a little bit manageable for you? So we are the Lartey Wellness Group. We are a private practice and a clinic in Maryland, and we expanded out to we're going to be expanding out to Florida and Cali. And right now, this is kind of our Monday powwow with the therapist. And so this actual topic was based off of a article that I saw on Psychology Today, where essentially it was saying that the impacts of childhood trauma on relationships, and and in our last week internal meeting, we actually talked about dealing with some traumas where we had a case study where we examined, okay, hey, if a client dealt with some sexual abuse in their past, and now this sexual abuse is really preventing them from moving on, or they constantly ruminate about it and they can't get it out their mind, they're constantly blaming themselves. And we said, okay, what are some things that we can help with the client, help this client with. And what I'll do is I will open it up to the therapist as to get some things that you all use when you dealing with traumas, or let's talk about any traumatic events in the past, and some strategies, some actionable things that our clients can use to help manage that trauma better. Does anybody want to go first?
I think for me, in kind of reviewing the material that you shared, one that I miss sometimes is emotional neglect. And it's one that I'm going to start screening a little harder for in future sessions, because people seem to think that the way that they were brought up was the way everybody was brought up. And sometimes that's not the case. And sometimes there was neglect in play.
Okay, so let's stay on that. So let's say I had some emotional neglect as a child. I my I wanted my parents, or I wanted some, I was feeling a little bit discomfort, and I wanted help from my parents. I didn't get that help. They didn't come and calm me down, or like I would just tell, hey, why are you crying? Don't show emotions. You got to be strong. You're not supposed to cry. And I felt that emotional neglect, and now I'm dealing with the consequences of that emotional neglect, right? Um, we can go into the article, because I think it bears, or somebody does somebody have something on emotional neglect, and how, what are the symptoms? Because the article actually lays it out really, 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 really well. I'm trying to pull it up here, but what will we say? So you're going to screen for it, and then what? Okay, I screen, and I was emotionally neglected. Thank you, Captain Obvious. Not to make a joke here, but I'm trying to add value, right? And trying to add value to say, okay, I know that I experienced emotional neglect, but now what?
All right. So I think about how is that manifested into my adult life. Maybe I've developed some people pleasing behaviors, my inability to establish boundaries in my personal life or my work life. And am I thinking of practical ways to kind of change that? Um, Teaching people that they have the ability to self-validate. What does that look like? Just being able uh, to encourage yourself, acknowledge your strengths, being mindful of that self-talk, things like that comes to mind.
That's good. That's good. I'm gonna push you all a little bit here. That's too bland for me. Don't be offended, but what am I going to do with that? Right. And I'm purposely playing devil's advocate, right? So because of the fact that I was talking to somebody who's dealing with trauma, and these the surface level things was not cutting it, because the guy's been dealing with it for a really, really long time. And it really made me like, he was forcing me. And what a lot of people don't know is I'm not a trauma expert. I don't know how I've avoided it for such a long time, but I realized that's a one piece of my arsenal that I struggle with it. Like, I mean, I've struggled helping people with it, because that hasn't been in my repertoire. So Jennifer, give me more things of how could that lead to, how is that leading to emotional neglect? I mean, how is my emotional neglect leading to people pleasing? How
Yeah, so emotional neglect, it often comes from our relationships. And
Mhm.
something that's pretty common in the media right now is attachment styles. So it's a pretty good way for adult clients, if they are doing research themselves or into the buzzwords, they're familiar with attachment styles. That's a pretty good place to start. And a way that it does come up, the emotional neglect in relationships, is people will say, oh, you have an avoidant attachment style. It's hard to talk to you about certain things. You aren't comfortable listening to what I have to say when I want to come to you about important emotional conversations. So a way that I provide psychoeducation is attachment styles. There's a lot of books that I have where it outlines perfectly, hey, this is what your relationships can look like. And then the action item that I always like to follow up with at the end of the same session is how you can build a secure attachment for yourself. So basically how you can get comfortable being that attachment figure, being that person that wants to be consistent, wants to be a good listener, building that comfort. And there's a whole list of different things you can do to show up for yourself in those ways.
I could say I would like to add something. Jennifer, that was great. The fact that you mentioned buzzwords, and there are buzzwords, I think what I've seen lately is a lot of clients who are more sophisticated with these buzzwords are actually talking about, I was emotionally neglected, I was emotionally abused, and so especially when you're an individual therapist versus a family therapist, and we were just talking about the word accountability, that Jennifer, we don't have a way to double check how valid or truthful that is when you're just seeing somebody individually. So it's really important to validate their feelings and say, well, so maybe you felt neglected. What do you think you needed? And you do give some psychoeducation, but I think it's really very important for, when you're working with somebody who was traumatized or neglected or whatever, they really need to work on how to understand the gray, because people are such black and white thinkers. And so they want to try to, and so if you're validating them, yeah, you're emotionally neglected, you don't want to validate them to not take responsibility for themselves as an adult, and to not be able to see that people aren't just black and white, all evil or all good. And so, to be able to help them be able to handle different kinds of relationships, even when they get triggered. So those are, without blaming the other person as being all evil.
Let's stay on that. Let's go deeper. Go ahead, Chelsea. Tell Chelsea.
No problem. Speaking of that gray area, in Psychology Today on October the 25th, there's an article entitled How to Overcome the I'm Not Worthy mindset. And having that mindset comes from emotional neglect and trauma. And some of the things it pointed out that can help is, let's see, healthy self-esteem can occur when you have a clear sense of what you value. And then you can regulate your behavior to align with your values and your self-esteem. And so if people are walking around just thinking, I'm not good enough, and it makes them cut themselves off and create boundaries, and they stop communicating with their partners, and they're both feeling it on both ends, they really should stop and think about, okay, what's important to me when it comes to goals, values, and interests, and list those out, and then change the behavior to match that, to align with that, so that you don't go around feeling like you don't have any self-esteem or that your self-worth is down.
Let's take a step back. How is that linkage? And so that was good, Chelsea. That was really, really good. But I'm going to challenge you all today. Bear with me here. How has that linkage occurred, right? So let's say as a child, I was taught that and this is my, as a child, I was taught that my feelings don't matter, right? Or whatever, my parents, they don't care about my feelings. And so now in my brain, what I'm hearing is my feelings don't matter. And so now what happens is I believe is what they call disassociation. And Lori, correct me if I'm wrong. So we've all heard of the fight or flight mentality, right? In our typical trauma, right? Where if we experience a traumatic event, we kind of either, you either freeze up or your heart starts to palpitate and you're ready to fight or lash back. What a lot of people aren't familiar with is when you disassociate with the situation, where you're kind of just numbing yourself. You're still in that environment, but because you felt that you don't matter, or because you felt that nobody really cares about you, you kind of go into your own little world. You kind of retreat into your own little world, and now in your own little world, that is the safe place. Right, and no one can. You're retreating to a place where nobody can hurt you, and in that little world, you create that. You disassociate from that reality, but now you're going into your own little world, and now you're kind of like the king of your world. And in your world, here, you associate, hey, people don't really care about me, so I don't really need to share anything. I don't really need to do all these things. Your mind is starting to, as Lori said, associate what's happening on the outside. And now because my parents don't really care about me, now I'm going to start to think others don't really care about me as well. Am I lying? Am I off? Did I miss something there? Is that right, wrong?
I think you described it really well, and the way you use the word disassociate is really good for a layman's kind of understanding. People actually you could say they numb themselves out, they pulled themselves away. If for the psychoeducation piece for therapists, it's just I do the one little caveat I'll say to you, Frank, from a trauma therapist point of view, is that we have to be careful. There are a lot of places where in like DSM and in therapeutic vocabulary where sometimes you describe a disorder, sometimes you're just describing a symptom, and the same words are used. So the word if you're using the word dissociate in more of a technical diagnostic kind of term, it's a little bit more detailed, not quite as easy to understand. Where when you're referring to dissociative identity disorder. So I just want therapists to be careful that they don't use the word to associate disassociation with dissociative identity disorder unless somebody really meets all that criteria. And almost always in DID, somebody's been traumatized in the way, you know, I describe it. You described it really well. Somebody's numbing themselves out. They go into their own world. If it gets extreme, it's, if I can't escape the abuse in physical reality, I'm going to escape it in my emotional reality and pretend it's happening to somebody else. You know, and so then it's different roles we play. And so, you know, if somebody's not, if their ego is strong enough to understand it, then you can talk to them about the different parts that they play. So they numb themselves out into their numb part.
Now, okay, so now I'm numbing myself. I'm numbing myself to it. And now how does that lead to the people pleasing behavior? Right? Because we talked about it. You all talked about the people pleasing behavior. You talked about the kind of like the outward symptoms of it as an adult. But how does that tie in? I'm numbing myself. Now how does that how am I getting to the people pleasing behavior?
I'd love to hear from everybody else. Just from me, from a supervisor point of view, you know, there's lots of opposites, you know. So if somebody never got what they felt they needed from their parents because their parents were neglecting them, it's that they're still trying to get those childhood needs met. So they are still looking, you know, they're looking, you know, they're other people in their lives are being parent substitutes that they're trying to please, but it never quite measures up. And so that's where you get the people-pleasing behavior. You might have some people who do the opposite, who were emotionally neglected, you know, and instead of doing people-pleasing, they're so into, I can't trust anybody. I can only trust myself. I can only take care of myself, that they numb and get cold and appear apathetic, appear arrogant, you know, get irritable. So you can have both types of reactions.
I think too, I don't want us to oversimplify, but I think we can't leave out the cultural impact in terms of neglect. I just think that sometimes we as therapists may perceive things in a certain way, and there may be cultural norms that may drive what we perceive as neglectful behavior.
What do you mean by that?
I mean, I'll use myself as an African American, growing up in an African American family that's spiritually based. There are certain cultural norms and values that I have grown to adhere to by choice, but not by choice when I was growing up. And a part of that may have been a child's place. So that may mean that there's a time and place for me as a child to interact, and there are kind of strict expectations for how, as a child, I am to behave, especially when the extended family members are around. So I just don't want us to lose sight that this is a complex issue.
And you know, I'm going to take it further. Okay. I understand that, right? So what I'm hearing is, in certain cultures, there's certain norms that you have to adhere to a child's place and certain protocols that you have to do, which I'm not arguing with that. But now I think the problem is, now I'm coming into an adult, but now because of the fact that I've been so conditioned, and because of the fact that I've grew up in this thing where, as a child, you know, I was expected to act a certain way. Now I'm finding myself, when I'm in relationships, when I'm working with others, I'm still acting in that childlike behavior that I was expected to. Help. Because it helped me appease my parents. It helped me when I was at a child, but now I'm 25, I'm 35, I'm 40, and I'm not able to express myself. I'm not able to trust people. What do I do?
To kind of touch on some of what Michelle said, I think that we know that with certain upbringings, there are certain traditions and values, I guess, or cultural norms, but that's also, in my opinion, where some of them break down. or where the line is kind of blurred in terms of emotional neglect or abuse. And I think that just kind of how can you validate someone's experience without it just means that you don't have to always agree, right? So you don't have to agree with them or think if they're right or wrong, whatever your belief is. I think just being able to um, convey that some empathy, I guess, in a way, um, and reflect their feelings is a way for you to validate them. Just a thought.
I like that. So convey empathy, reflect their feelings, because this is real, right? So Michelle, I'm purposely drawing this out to get to let y'all know the feedback that clients are going to give you. Well, the feedback that I got when I was given these things, and essentially, I think it was said so beautifully last time. The problem with these traumatic events is I understand the cultural aspect of it, but the problem is what helped you as a child is now detrimental to you in your adulthood. And they're coming to you as an adult and they're saying, hey, look, I'm having these issues here. And you see that a lot in trauma is that your your emotional development was stumped when that neglect, when that emotional abuse, when that perceived, or alleged or whatever it is, whatever was happening, it was stumped. So you're not able to function properly because emotionally you're still functioning as that child that was told, hey, look, this is my place. Now imagine if you work with a boss like that, where, hey, to my subordinates, to people that are under me, if I'm an authority figure, I expect you to listen to me and I don't want any feedback. I don't want anything. It's my way or the highway. Right? Now imagine you working with somebody like that. And now you're just like, man, this guy's unbelievable. He doesn't let me talk. Hopefully it's not me, but maybe it is. I don't know.
Frank, I think you brought this in a really important direction because it's reminding me of shame. And a lot of the clients that I work with who were raised a certain way based on their culture, we can say like first generation children whose parents are immigrants to the United States. It can get very confusing and they can feel very shameful to feel like you don't align with the way that your parents raised you and to be questioning certain values. Like, for example, I have a few clients who have experiences with not knowing how to approach money in the family, what their duties are. They know the duty traditionally, but what do they do now, right? They're raised American, and it's very confusing, and it causes feelings of shame that are associated with this trauma. And it can bleed into their friendships, their work relationships, because the trauma is around finances, and it runs very deep.
I agree. I like that. I like this thing. So help, right? Give me some actionable things from the panel. I feel let's stick to that scenario, right? I'm a first generation immigrant. I feel shame. I'm, exactly what Jennifer says. That's the scenario. As a therapist, what tool are you going to give them? How do you take it forward?
I would, really try to help the client find other aspects of themselves that they value. It can't just be the financial piece. If that's the piece that's really holding them back and giving them so much pain, they have to start, valuing themselves in other ways. I know that sounds pretty vague and, but you just have to start that conversation with them. And they can start having compassion for themselves when they just kind of connect and realize, okay, we're all a part of this same humanity or human soup, I guess. And if you're able to have compassion for other people, then you should also be able to have compassion for yourself and realize that you're more than just your ability to have financial prowess or whatever. You've got all these other wonderful traits and characteristics about you.
Wonderful. Final word. Take it.
Just to bounce off of that, exploring someone's identity, just overall, can be really helpful, and exploring who they want to be. Because if there is that neglect, there's that experience of shame, of shaming yourself for your thoughts being different than what you think society or your family is expecting of you. So really exploring how do you think you should respond? What do you expect to happen? So doing some perspective taking. How would your closest friend handle the situation? What would they say? What would your mother say? And then allowing the client to evaluate for themselves how they want to approach the situation can be very empowering and can help them find their own voice.
Christabel.
Yeah, and also drawing on the person's strengths and how those strengths have played in the person's overall functioning, kind of bring focus to the current situation and how the person can use the same strength to kind of move forward and learn a new way of doing things.
Excellent. Brownie, you can stop the recording. Thank you all.